Have you ever noticed that some of the best ideas come from unexpected places? Your next breakthrough may come from a leader facing similar challenges, but in a completely different sector. Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop. Join us as we explore how today's successful leaders inspire, influence, and connect with others. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board, who have teamed up to spotlight how great leaders and communicators are making their impact in the world. This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs, ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. As a proud GW graduate myself, I can attest that faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop. Today, we're highlighting lessons and experiences shared by leaders we've previously had on the show. All discussions revolve around the theme of two-way influence. Not just how leaders are influential and can get their message out, but how they influence one another and they allow their constituents or their members or their customers or their team to influence them. Today, you'll hear from Danica Roem, Virginia State Senator, Andy Kim, U.S. Representative for the 3rd District of New Jersey and Democratic nominee for the United States Senate, Rob Sand, Iowa State Auditor, and Tony Woods, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs for the state of Maryland. We're starting off today's episode with Rob Sand as he discusses how to communicate openly and authentically to create a meaningful impact in his community. Our whole idea behind this is that some of the most effective leaders are more than chief executives or principals of their offices. They are chief influencers. And so I want to start by asking you, what is the impact that you want to see in the world, and who is it that you have to influence to achieve that impact?
That's a question that can be both deep and broad. One of the things that I've been thinking more than ever lately, I've always thought it, but it seems particularly relevant in a time of great change, is the idea that we should work with anyone to do good and work with no one to do bad. We're at a place politically where it seems like there's a lot of upheaval, where partisanship is deepening, and yet at the same time coalitions are changing a little bit, partially because of the deepening partisanship. And so you're finding people who, said, oh, well, it used to be this, and now I'm not so sure anymore. And so to me, the idea that you would work with anyone to do good and work with no one to do bad is really important, because we have to keep in mind that everybody out there is sort of going through this same tumultuous moment. Lots of people are looking for a place where they belong, or a sense of home in terms of people who share their values. But also most people are paying a little bit more attention than they have for a long time to determine whether or not their affiliations in the past still help them do that today. So if I was going to answer the question of, what do I want to do in the world? It's as much good as possible with anyone who will join with me to do it, and try to stop as much bad as possible, no matter who that's coming from. And I think the ability, look, I'm in elected office. I was elected the first time in 2018, just got reelected in 2022. The only Democrat in statewide or federal office currently in Iowa. But who I need to influence to do that, in the shortest answer is anyone I can. This isn't an isolated job. It's not a company that simply can do its work and go forward in the world and trust that its impact is going to be had in its sphere. We have to, in politics, you have to win an election to have impact, to help set policy, to help set direction. And winning an election requires persuading your ordinary everyday citizen, many of whom, again, I think right now are paying more attention than they have for a long time. And the more people you can persuade who are also in elected office, the better. So there's really no list, no end to the list of people that we need to add to the coalition to promote change. But by being willing to be out there and be communicating with people in a way that's a lot more open and a lot more human than I think most people expect from a public official, that really, I think, magnifies the ability to have that impact.
We believe some of the most effective leaders are more than chief executives. They are chief influencers. As a journalist turned elected official, can you tell us, who do you have to influence to achieve the impact that you want to see in the world?
Well, first, I need to be influenced by, and I need to then summarily re-influence my constituents. That is number one, which is that I have to know what's important to them and then execute the issues that are important to them. So, from a lifetime of living here in Western Prince William County, from being a reporter here for 9 years, 2 months and 2 weeks from 2006 to 2015, and from the last 6 years having served this area, as a member of the Virginia House of Delegates, I've got a really good understanding of what it is, that are, very important issues on a macro level throughout Western Prince William, as well as the two cities of Manassas and Spark. But when it comes to the micro, I'm not going to know every single thing about every single one of the 101,000 people I represent. That's literally impossible. So how do you get to know what's really going to be important like that, right? Well, you got to go knock doors and you got to go listen and you got to go talk to people and you got to go out. And when you hear them, for example, when I was first running for office in 2017, I didn't know that reforming the adult guardianship system in Virginia was going to become one of my chief issues that I end up working on, in the House of Delegates. But because one of my constituents talked to me about an issue that was very personal to her that would result in her sister dying due to, terrible care or lack thereof, I would even argue intentionally malicious care, that I want to go do something about it. And so in that case, the influence to me was, here's why you should care about this issue. And I was influenced on it because I have a set of values about protecting the most vulnerable people. And there is no form of person who is more vulnerable in society than incapacitated adults. Incapacitated adults don't have access to their rights. Someone else controls that for them. And so they are always at the mercy of other people making right decisions for them. And I want to go do something about it. So all 3 terms I've been in office, I have filed legislation about reforming the adult guardianship system. And this year, we finally got a lot of that done. We got major reforms done where we're requiring guardians to now have to actually visit their wards 3 times a year, once in person or virtual, once in person or virtual or by a designee. And I wanted 4 in-person visits. We had to compromise to get where we were, but it's a step, right? And one of the other bills that we did with this ended up allowing family members to have more rights to visit their loved ones who are, incapacitated. And there's a whole thing that goes with that. And we also made sure that we had equal lengths of terms on the basically adult guardianship advisory board that deals with this in the first place, so that there's a lot more consistency there. But long and short of it is, it wasn't just me doing this. I also managed to influence a number of my colleagues to carry similar, or carry legislation on the same topic. And the reason that's important is because my legislative portfolio can't just be one topic. I can't just have, 15 bills on this one thing. I've got to have help from other colleagues because look, reforming the, adult guardianship system in Virginia, that doesn't just affect, people in Western Prince William and Manassas Park. It affects people all throughout Virginia. And so you need to have a lot of different voices, a lot of different experiences. And so when Jackie Glass won her special election the night before we were all sworn in 2022, I gave her one of my bills to carry for reforming the guardianship system, and she got it passed. It was one of her first bills to get passed, which was awesome. And Delegate Sally Hudson, she got a bill passed, on this topic, and we've had other bills passed from other members on this topic in the last few years too. All of this is really important, and it was nothing that I brought to the table when I launched my campaign in 2017, but I was influenced by my constituents to do it. And since then, I've, influenced my colleagues to support this legislation through battling for it for 6 years. And I've influenced my colleagues to carry legislation about this as well, because it's also important for them. So, and I've had a good partner with Senator Jeremy Pike in this as well, too, by the way. So, just long and short of everything is influence is more of a roundabout than a two-way street. There's a lot of different angles in which people can kind of come at it, and at some point you're all just going to kind of meet in that middle right there, right? And hopefully, when you are doing this job and you do it well, everyone works in good faith, then you have a predictable way to get on the other side, and be a better legislator for it. If people don't work in good faith, though, then the influence that they have on you is actually negative in terms of their own reputation. And so they can have a bad influence on you in terms of your perception about them. I know that's a lot to digest, but it's really important to act in good faith this way, that the influence that you choose to exert and that you choose to be influenced by, is coming from a good place. But if it's not coming from a good place and someone tries to influence you to do the wrong thing, people are going to catch on.
Since this show is about influence, I think it's appropriate to start with a big victory you recently had that will have ripple effects for time to come. Can you explain what the county line is in New Jersey for those of us who aren't familiar, and why you fought to eliminate it?
Sure. So New Jersey is just about the last bastion of political machine left in America. And the biggest part of it that has influence there on the side of the machine is that they can affect how the ballot looks. So 49 other states use what's called an office block ballot. It's just traditional. You have the running for Senate, all the candidates below. In New Jersey, party leaders can actually give preferential placement for their endorsed candidates, so they can give an advantage to someone on the actual ballot, which is kind of just crazy to think about, and completely unfair in my opinion. So this is something that I decided that I would file a lawsuit about to try to change. And I think for me, it's a recognition that this isn't just about me and my Senate race here in 2024. This just needs to be fixed, especially as I'm someone who is a member of the Democratic Party that constantly espouses the need to be able to protect our democracy, about fairness and equality in this nation. And I believe that we need to hold true to those values no matter what, and especially to make sure we're not being inconsistent and taking those advantages. If they benefit us, we need to show that we're being consistent across the board.
Building on the theme of fairness and inclusion in our democratic processes, Tony Wood shares how it's crucial to recognize that while we're addressing the structures that influence elections, we also need to focus on how to engage and support those who have served our country, ensuring that every veteran feels connected and valued within our communities. For veterans who may not be taking advantage of the benefits that are available to them, or may not feel as connected because of that archetype that you shared, I guess they must feel sort of left out in some ways. And I wonder, what are some of the things that your department is doing to make sure that they all feel included?
Well, one of the things that has been one of the biggest privileges of this role is working for a governor who is a veteran. And when Governor Moore ran for office, his campaign slogan, pledge, was "Leave no one behind." And a lot of folks think, oh, that's a pretty good sounding thing. And he certainly meant all Marylanders when he said it. But his experience as a veteran or in the military, that's actually a pretty solemn pledge that we make to one another on the battlefield, right? And so for me, I very much interpreted that as an obligation of looking for veterans who are at risk of being left behind, who are members of a marginalized community, or who may not see themselves reflected in kind of the sort of more typical stories that we would tell about veterans or the veteran experience. And so, as I alluded to a little earlier, telling a broader range of stories is just really important. So one of the things that we did in partnership with our legislature was pass a bill that honors the service of the 688 Postal Service Battalion, which was an all-Black female postal battalion in World War II, who had the responsibility of sorting all the mail and helping to boost morale for our service members overseas. And so just sort of finding small examples to tell different stories, to elevate the experience of different folks really goes a long way. So that's one. There is just the sort of basic bringing our department's communications capabilities into the later 21st century.
being more active on social media, realizing that veterans, particularly Gulf War or post 9/11 veterans, often consume video information. Video just sort of performs better, obviously, on social media platforms. So thinking through how do we do and portray more dynamic content and material on more platforms in more ways. And then, thinking through, well, how do we meet this generation of veterans where they are when it comes to their interests, right? So if there's a little bit more of a focus on health and wellness and fitness and nature and getting back out into the world, well, we've got to find them in those places and bring forward programming, content, experiences that gives us an opportunity to run into them there, tell them that they've earned something great, tell them that we want them to be a part of part of the sort of the community in significant ways for the long term, and support them as best we can.
In today's digital age, social media has emerged as a powerful tool for leaders to shape public perception and influence their audiences. By leveraging platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, leaders can communicate their vision, engage with constituents in real time, and foster a sense of community. This dynamic interaction not only enhances transparency, but also allows leaders to respond to emerging issues swiftly and authentically. Rob Sand walks us through how he conducts Transparency Tuesdays through Facebook Live, and Andy Kim shares how he found his authentic voice on social media through trial and error. I'd love to dive in more on that in terms of social media.
Sure.
Because one, we know so many leaders just try to delegate their social media to somebody on their team, and it doesn't come through in the same level of authenticity. You've gone even beyond, I think, just the fact that you're managing those accounts. You have this Transparency Tuesday thing that you do on Facebook Live, and you use that to connect with your constituents each week. And sometimes they're shorter, sometimes they're longer. You answer people's questions, you tell them what's going on. You have tens of thousands of viewers, sometimes even much more than that, depending on the week. Can you talk about how that came about? Obviously, you see some value in it because you keep doing it. You're a really busy guy and you keep doing it, so it must be valuable. Because I think leaders who are in all different industries are going to find this really interesting. They might find it exciting and yet kind of scary and daunting to even think about doing that. And so tell us more.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people are nervous by the idea of live anything. A lot of people in elected office. To me, if I'm live on something, it's like, well, I am live. Like, we're all live. Like, I'm a human being. I'm comfortable in my own skin. It's okay if I make a mistake. We all make mistakes. So Transparency Tuesdays, if anybody's on Facebook, you can tune in. Again, I'm at Rob Sand IA every Tuesday at 7:45 p.m. or very close to then if I am getting the kids home from basketball game. It's usually right about 7:45 p.m. on the nose. I start a live broadcast. I tell people what I did that week. Usually I highlight the things that are a little bit unusual. And I don't get into granular level details on each thing that I did. It's just a kind of a list of highlights. It could be 3 things that stuck out, or it could be 10 things that stuck out if it was an really interesting week. And maybe one of them is a moment to sort of shed a little light on what's happening in government for people and give them a little bit more detail. But then at the end, I also always, and I try to see, I'll have the comments on the screen as I'm talking. Sometimes I'll catch them while I'm talking, but I try to catch questions and comments at the end by scrolling through as much as I can. And so sometimes Transparency Tuesday is 3 minutes long. I just tell people what I did, and in the 3 minutes that I'm on there, nobody has added any questions, and I sign off. Sometimes it's 20 minutes. It could be that something controversial or there's a lot of big news going on, whether it's controversial or not. It could be that our office released a special report that people have a lot of questions about, for example, Medicaid. Or it just could be that we're getting into a topic that people are feeling chatty about. And I just try to answer their questions as best I can. It's not really that different from having a town hall in person, which is, again, what I do with all 100 county seats. But it's just an opportunity for people to tune in and ask a question of a statewide elected official. And Anthony, I really like the idea, by the way, because elected officials are so distant. They are so cloistered. And some of that is by design. I think people with a lot of staff and consultants around them try to keep their elected away from people because they don't want a mistake. I think some of it is inevitable. If you're representing a state in Washington, D.C., you are gone a lot because the way the system currently works requires you to be in Washington, right? But I don't think that that distance is a good thing. I think it's important for people to have a sense of the ability to reach their government, to reach levers of whatever degree of power, and to actually have an interaction there, to have a check-in point. And so when you ask about, like what the impact is or what the value of it is, to me, a big part of the value is just people knowing, hey, there's one guy in elected office, at least, who anytime I want, I can, if I have a thing I'm thinking about, I can just remember, hey, I should tune in at 7:45 p.m. for Transparency Tuesdays, and I can talk to the Iowa State Auditor and ask him a question about that. And I think that level of accessibility is honestly really important. This is, the 3 million people in the state of Iowa here, 3.1 million, those are my bosses. Those are people who pay taxes. They run the state, and our work in overseeing how those tax dollars are spent impacts their lives. So for me to be able to check in with them and for them to have a sense of the ability to check in, even if they don't use it a lot, I think that sense of the ability to do it is still important too.
You also post on social media accounts yourself, and I want to ask kind of your thoughts about kind of showing up in the digital age. Do you think it's important for leaders to have access to their own accounts? And can you talk about your approach?
Yeah. I'll be honest with you, it took me a little while to kind of find a voice. And you do need to kind of find an authentic voice online. I come from the national security world, so I was not allowed to have social media accounts when I worked previously in government. So this is still pretty new, but I think for me, yes. I mean, it's more than just conveying information. It's about giving a sense of who you are. And I think right now, again, there's so much distrust in government right now, so much distrust in politicians. So, there's just this initial skepticism that you have to break through. Like, people just assume that someone else is doing your social media, that, this is all just kind of like highly orchestrated stuff. And what I found that is both true to who I am and how I write and how I express myself, but also what people are interested in, is when I can show a sense of rawness, just a sense of honesty or earnestness. And not everyone's going to believe it or recognize it, and I get that. But whether it's about just how I write, how I write statements, well, not even statements because that sounds too formal, but just like how I try to convey words. It's different than a press release, and that's something that I had to really learn and hone. And also, the way I sort of describe it is like I'm a storyteller. I try to tell stories, whether that's my stump speech or social media. And when you tell stories, it's very powerful to tell personal stories. Be able to share that with people, give them a sense of like who you are and what motivates you, what pushes you. So, and a lot of that is, also about my family, my kids, because they're what motivates me. So I often, I hesitated to write or talk about my kids, but I realized that like people won't understand who I am if I don't talk about them or share my deep love for them or how silly they are and how happy that makes me feel. Like, a person will just not understand the core of why I do my politics. Like, I do this for my kids. Like, me being in Congress, this is my way of trying to be a good dad, to like fix the broken world that they're growing up in, fix the healthcare, the education, the other things that I want them to have. So if they don't understand what it means for me to be a dad, then they just simply won't understand who I am or why I do what I do. I think that was an important realization for me.
In an era where transparency and authenticity are paramount, effective leaders understand the importance of owning their narratives. By embracing their true selves and sharing their unique stories, leaders not only build trust, but also foster deeper connections with their audiences. Authenticity allows them to resonate on a personal level, demonstrating that they're not just figures of authority, but relatable individuals with their own journeys. Danica Roem explores how owning one's own narrative empowers leaders to inspire others and create a lasting impact. So I loved your book, Burn the Page. It is such a high energy and entertaining. memoir about your life and your experience. And I actually listened to it, which I'm so glad I did because you narrate it. And so that humor and style really comes through. One of the themes of the book and really of your life story is own your own narrative. Don't let others control your story, that it's yours. I think a lot of leaders really struggle to embrace the authenticity of who they are. They might try to show up as different people in different places. And you talk a lot about that. I wonder if you could share about your own journey and the lessons that you've learned, and how that might inform your leadership style, which obviously has resonated with so many people, not just locally, but around the world.
Sure. So, when I wrote Burn the Page in the first place, I really wanted to get that narrative out of, casting fires to stories you don't want to be in anymore. And one of the best ways to do that is to tell your story. It's not like you have to write the most salacious thing in the world. I always say like drama queens have a place, and it's on RuPaul's Drag Race. They do not belong, in every other, aspect of society here, where you're just like, oh my God, look what a mess I am. It's like, no, you don't need that. But in terms of, okay, what are other people going to use against you? What are the stories about, who you are, where you've come from, where you've made mistakes, you've been flawed, you've got things that you're not necessarily that proud of. Well, I would rather be the one who's telling that story than having other people tell it. People try to this day still try to do that with me. I'm like, all right, it is what it is. I just accept it and I acknowledge it and move on. And what I think other leaders, or in this case, other influencers could have here, for your audience, is if you have enough comfortability and confidence to be able to tell your story, you're going to be able to influence other people to want to do the same for themselves in only the way they can. And that's one of the crucial parts about this, is remembering that we all share one thing in common, which is a first person perspective. And so anything else about your life is going to be based on observation. It is not going to be based on lived experience. You uniquely have that lived experience because you know what was going on in your head in those moments, assuming that you can remember those moments, of course. Some moments are more clear than others. See my 20s, which I wrote about rather in depth in Burn the Page. It's very blunt and honest about using alcohol as a security blanket. For a good part of my 20s, I was never an alcoholic, but I was definitely a social drinker, and I was a party drinker at that. And so you front heavy metal bands for 12 years, and you lead a band that you style as Drunk Thrash. Well, that's going to happen, right? So, I was upfront and honest, like, yeah, these are stories of my life, put it out there. And at the same time, my constituents to date, they're like, you know what? I might not be able to relate with every part of your story here, but I do relate with your honesty. I do relate with your authenticity. And, I'm sure I will be seeing a ton of mailers and TV ads or digital ads or whatever else used against me later this year, based entirely on the book or other things. Okay, election day is 20 weeks from today. Is what it is. I just accept it. I'm like, okay, well, while you all talk about that, that's fine. I will go and talk about fixing roads and feeding kids.
Recruitment challenges are a common thread across various sectors, from membership associations to universities and beyond. As we explore this topic, it's essential to recognize the unique insights that can be gained from the military experience. Tony Woods brings a valuable perspective on how to foster a sense of community and purpose within teams, emphasizing the importance of authenticity and genuine commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Obviously, there's a challenge with recruitment, and that's a challenge shared by membership associations and universities and employers of all kinds. What are some of the lessons that you've learned about recruitment that could be valuable for others in different industries outside of the military?
Yeah, I think it's a really important challenge. The military in particular is in a competition for talent. And if it doesn't create an environment that individuals realize that they can bring their whole selves to work, that creates risk for it, right? That creates risk for the military, and that is partially, one contributing factor to why it's having a hard time reaching those recruiting goals. I will say one of the most beautiful things about serving in the military is you very quickly move beyond the things that make you different from one another because you're focused on challenges that are greater than yourselves. And that's one of the most valuable lessons I ever experienced in the military, and that I've taken with me to this work, right? How do you create mission-driven teams where people feel like they're a part of something greater than themselves that allows them to ignore the things that make them different or see beyond the things that make them different, right? So that was one of my favorite aspects. I will say that this younger generation of individuals, Gen Z, they really do want to see themselves reflected, and I think they've got a great eye for authenticity. So if you think that having a few folks on your website or in your materials or in your brochures is going to be enough to portray that this is an inclusive environment, they're going to start to ask the questions and realize, well, do you have employee resource groups? Well, let's start to talk about promotion rates amongst people of color and women. How are you handling things like harassment? What did you do in the wake of George Floyd's murder? What were your corporate statements? Right? It's those types of things where they realize, is this a veneer of inclusivity and a veneer of a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or is this a long-standing corporate held value? And so I think that is my advice. The best day to plant a tree is 40 years ago or today, right? And so if a corporation has not or an organization has not worked on showing that commitment, start now and listen to the employees who would bring those perspectives, and start now in building that inclusive environment.
Expanding on the idea of fostering inclusive environments, Andy Kim discusses how leaders can actively engage and make an impact in today's climate.
I mean, hard to imagine a better picture to represent servant leadership than that one. And I think so many who saw it, they all thought in a tough time, what are each of us doing to make a difference? So definitely not surprised that it struck a chord, and you heard from so many people. Definitely my experience as well. Well, I want to ask you, just as government leaders like you are dealing with polarization in the world right now, so are leaders in business, leaders of nonprofits, from employees to the communities they serve. I wonder what advice you have for how leaders can show up and engage in today's climate.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm still learning this as well, but I think what you said is a place to start, which is you have to show up. You actually have to engage, and that's something that I think in politics feels so distant. Like, people feel very distant and removed from their politics. They think democracy just exists down in the DC, and that's where our government is, and that they're being ignored by their political leaders who are more interested in chasing their own ego and their ambition rather than engaging with them. And I can imagine that, that issue of proximity is going to be there no matter what the organization is, even if it's a small business, even if it's a small organization. That sense of proximity, like, are the leaders of this organization paying attention to what we're doing? Are they respecting what we're doing? Are they understanding our role? And so that just requires that interaction, that accessibility. And that's something for me. Like, I've now done 73 town halls as a member of Congress in a little over 5 years. I find these to be incredibly important. And there's one town hall that I did in the deep Republican part of my district, and I remember when I took every question. I stood before them and said, whether you voted for me or not, you're my boss, and my job is to serve you. And at the end, there was a long line of people. Older gentleman waited 45 minutes to come up to me. And when he did, he looked at me and he said, I just want you to know I didn't vote for you. And I was a little taken aback. I said, okay. And then he said, and I was very hesitant to come to this town hall today. But then he put out his hand, shook my hand and said, but I'm glad I did. And shook my hand and walked off. And look, I don't necessarily think I earned that man's vote just for showing up and taking some tough questions, but I do think I earned his respect. And I think that sense, respect comes from the fact that I showed up in his town. I showed him respect. I listened to every question. I didn't demean anybody. I gave them equal time. I gave them thoughtful responses, even if it meant I disagreed vehemently. And so I think that's so much of what we're missing right now. And I imagine that sense of respect, that sense of accessibility, and that sense of just listening to people can be important leadership traits, no matter what industry sector, no matter what style or shape of organization. We're missing a lot of that right now, and that's what I think our society needs.
Human connection is the cornerstone of our shared experiences and interactions. It's an increasingly digital world, so the need for genuine relationships and emotional bonds is more important than ever. Those connections foster empathy, collaboration, and understanding, enriching our personal and professional lives. As we explore the profound impact of human connection, let's hear how Rob Sand cultivates these relationships and how he drives meaningful change in his community.
And that openness and that humanity definitely comes through with your style. I mean, you said it, but I want to make sure everybody knows you're the only statewide or federal office holder from the whole state of Iowa who's a Democrat right now.
Right.
So obviously, you're doing something right. You're going against the tide there in a way, and you're also the only Democrat elected to state auditor in the last 50 years. So, kind of wondering, like, what's your secret to even let Iowans know what the state auditor does? Because most people probably don't have a clear picture of that.
Yeah.
And how do you bring that human touch to your interactions with millions of citizens across the state, so that they support you and that you're elected and you're reelected?
Yeah, I think it's important for all of us to remember, sometimes people say this in a way that sounds condescending, but it's an important point to make, I think, particularly to people who are well educated about it. We live in a democratic republic, and we send people. The idea behind a democratic republic is that we send people to go figure this stuff out, right? Your average citizen in a democratic republic, they don't have to know. They don't have to personally have a 5-point plan to solve X problem, or have a strong opinion about what we should be doing to solve Y problem. The whole idea here is you find someone who you think is going to make good decisions, and then you pay them a salary and send them to go figure it out, right? So to me, a big part of that is just being willing to explain to people, not in a way that presupposes that they should know the answer, right? Because no matter who it is that's coming to my house, right? If it's the guy who sweeps the chimney, or the guy who handles the AC, or guy who put a radon system in, like, I don't know how to do what they do. They're good at what they do. I'm glad they're here doing what they do. I love to get explanations from them as to how it works. And I think most people like being let into the process of governance in the same way. And so to me, I think a big piece of the job is going around and, like you said, answering the question, what's the state auditor do? Well, it's a very ordinary question. Anthony, I actually get asked that question more than anything else. People who just say, oh, okay, what are you doing? Because they understand, right? They understand. I vote me as a citizen, I vote in the elections. I try to pay attention to what's going on, so I'm informed to make a good decision when I vote. But the people that I'm sending are the ones that know much more about how this all works. And that's just like every other part of the economy. And so I like to answer those questions and kind of let people into the process of governance with a lot more transparency than I think they're accustomed to. And people appreciate it because, frankly, this is their business, right? It's their business that we are working on and we're doing. So when I travel around the state, my answers to people are typically, look, the easiest way to understand this is in Iowa, we're the taxpayer's watchdog. We sniff around and we bark, right? So we conduct financial audits, we do public corruption investigations, and we also do efficiency promotion. 3 things that are very important to making sure that once you've paid your taxes, they are getting used in a way that's conducive and helpful for you. And I answer those questions in person. I go to all 100 county seats in the state of Iowa every year. While there's 99 counties, which most people are familiar with, Lee County actually has 2 county seats. And so I go to both of them. Our efficiency program, which is called PI, we tour the state and give PI awards for that. And I'm very active on social media. My accounts, which you can find pretty much on any social media network at Rob Sand IA. I run them. I'm the one tweeting. I'm the one replying. And I try to be just more active and more transparent in terms of what's going on in governance.
Imposter syndrome is a common challenge that many individuals, including leaders, face as they navigate their careers. This pervasive feeling of self-doubt can lead to a belief that they are undeserving of their achievements and that they'll be found out at any moment. Effective leaders understand that acknowledging these feelings is crucial, but allowing them to dictate actions is not an option. By recognizing their own value and embracing their unique journey, leaders can rise above imposter syndrome, inspire confidence in others, and cultivate an environment where everyone feels empowered to contribute their best. Let's hear how Tony Woods navigates this mindset.
There is something about giving yourself the grace of ignoring the feeling or the sort of voice in your head that sort of kind of reinforces imposter syndrome, which makes you feel like, you don't belong there, or you haven't earned this, or all those types of things. Nope, you gotta quiet those. You've got to work as hard as you can, and you got to lean into the work, and do the best that you can for the limited time that you have the privilege of serving in a role like.
In an era where information is abundant yet often distorted, promoting transparency is vital for fostering trust and accountability in our political landscape. Leaders and citizens alike must navigate a complex web of narratives where inaccuracies can shape public opinion and policy decisions. By prioritizing clear communication and actively challenging misinformation, we can create a more informed electorate and ensure that discussions are grounded in truth. As we delve into this topic, let's hear how both Rob Sand and Andy Kim discuss their perspectives on the importance of transparency in political discourse and the critical role we all play in advocating for accuracy and integrity.
Well, this might sound kind of weird, but I actually sort of hate politics. I think politics is incredibly stupid and frustrating compared to what it could and should be. And so much of it, one of the things I tell people that I miss about being in court from having been a prosecutor is in court, if you lie, there's typically consequences for it. In politics, it's almost the opposite. It's like the lie helps the people who are willing to tell it get away with what they want. I actually, almost all of the attacks or the pushback on me have been false, whether it's knowingly false and people are lying or they just don't even understand. Like, I appreciate the opportunity to say, hey, look, politics. Hey, look, transparency, and one of my best performing Facebook videos recently was, I called it show and tell, and I'm going to do a lot more of them. Show and tell on a new statute that passed in Iowa and all the reasons why the words on the page of the statute were very dangerous for taxpayers and were going to lead to a lack of oversight. But I was just pointing them to the words of the actual statute, opposed to like talking points repeated, regurgitated in a newspaper article that's basically just saying he said, she said, which is a lot of what media coverage is these days. And so I love the opportunity for, if I get criticism that isn't fair or isn't accurate, good, fun. It lets me illustrate how my expectations of many people in politics is the same as the public, which is that it's a lot of inaccuracy. And I'm sitting right here in front of them, pointing out those inaccuracies.
I think that's a great lesson for all leaders, because I think, today you do have to show up both in person and digitally, but finding that voice, you can't just replicate what somebody else is doing. It won't work for you. And so it's I think good to hear that it's been a journey for you to find your voice and that everyone has to take the time to do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's just, people can tell when you're just giving them talking points, whether that's online or in a stump speech or whatnot. Like, they can tell that. Like, you got to give the voters more credit, and they're smarter than often the political world sees them as, and they can tell when someone's just a politician just spouting out lines that someone else wrote for them. They can literally tell by the way you talk, the way you inflect, the way you engage, and they don't like that. And now more than ever. And so, I think, perhaps the scarcest commodity that there is in politics is authenticity and genuineness, rawness. But that is actually what is craved right now. People want to get a sense of who you are as an actual person.
You've worked with a number of leaders, from President Barack Obama and National Security Advisor Susan Rice to Generals David Petraeus and John R. Allen. How have some of those leaders influenced your own leadership style?
Yeah, I'll give you one example. I've been in some very, I had the great honor of being able to be in the room for a good number of President Obama's really, some of his toughest decisions in national security. And what I always found interesting is, for instance, in the Situation Room, if it was a particularly tough decision, he would kind of walk on in, and no one would really necessarily know what his position might be on this decision before him. And he would just kind of immediately point to people, make people go around the room and tell him their thoughts. But he was very clear in doing so in a way that didn't tip his hand of like how he might be feeling. And like, I thought that was like, it was powerful to see, especially at the highest of levels, him hearing from his cabinet, wanting that opinion, not coming out and saying things because we know that if the president comes out and says, oh, I might be leaning towards this, like it might influence how people talk to him. So that sense of like, how do you get honest assessments? Like, how do you get like honest assessments from your top team? That was really powerful. And then the other aspect of it, this was something I learned from some of the other leaders, is like how to make a decision. That is arguably, I know it sounds very simple, but it's very difficult for people. And even at the highest of levels. And in fact, sometimes at the highest of levels with the greatest stakes, that's when it becomes all the more difficult. But it's not just how to make a decision, how to make an informed yet timely decision. Because what we've seen so often is that, if you linger too long in making a decision, sometimes the decision is made for you by just changing circumstances. And so that activeness is important. And I think you might see, look, when Menendez got indicted, I made the decision to jump in to run for Senate within 24 hours. It was not because I had decided this beforehand. In fact, I was not planning on running for Senate, but I've been able to kind of hone in my career so far in my life a way where I can make quick decisions that I feel comfortable with if I feel like I hit a certain threshold of both passion and information. And I don't want to make reckless decisions. I want them to be thoughtful and informed, but I do try to push myself to make faster decisions if I feel like that is something that can help, the ultimate outcome. And so like, I do think that there's a bit of importance of understanding risk-taking. Again, not reckless risk-taking, but thoughtful, informed risk-taking. And that's something that often I find it's a challenge in government, especially in a very bureaucratic structure. It's very hard to find places where one can take measured and calculated and thoughtful risks. But I do think it's important. Otherwise, if you're not willing to, sometimes I've just seen decisions kind of wither on the vine, people unwilling to get there unless they feel like it's absolute certainty. But you will never find any tough decision where you have 100% clarity that this is the right decision. At some point, you need to take a risk. And I do think that that's where you can see and separate different qualities of leadership.
As we explore the intricacies of leadership, a crucial aspect is the ability to influence those with whom you must cooperate. This skill becomes even more refined over time, especially for leaders navigating multiple terms in office. Today, we're wrapping up this episode with Danica Roem and her practical insights that can inspire leaders in all fields to enhance their collaborative efforts and effectively engage with their peers. Can you talk about that style of how you influence those that you need to cooperate with and what you've learned from your first term to now, you're in your third term? Because again, I think there are a lot of lessons for leaders who have to influence other leaders as part of their work.
So when you know what it's like to be the only person like you in every room that you enter, you have to show a lot of grace to people who either do have good intentions but don't express them well, or have malicious intent and they don't like what you represent. They don't like you. They don't think that your values align with theirs. And at the same time, there's going to be, of the thousands of bills that come up, there's going to be things that you agree on. And so you have to remember bill to bill to bill to bill that, hey, this person who I don't agree with today, I might need their vote on something else another time, right? And you're going to have to initiate these conversations. I've absolutely got people in the Virginia General Assembly who, we'll just put it this way. If I won my next election and they didn't, I wouldn't lose any sleep. It's just fine. That's fine. I've also got people who I really, really, really hope to come back, this next year, because I have phenomenal working relationships with them on both sides of the aisle, by the way. Like got plenty of that. It's like, sure, would I love to see 140 Democrats, in the General Assembly? Sure, of course. Those days are long gone. The Democratic Party used to have that sort of dominance in Virginia, and the much more when they were the conservative Democrat states, the Dixiecrat states. Those days are long gone. So in the modern day here, you've got to find the grace within yourself to be able to have a conversation with someone who disagrees with you on things that are very important to you. It doesn't mean you stop fighting. It doesn't mean that you don't stand up for your values. It doesn't mean that when you were working on compromises on some things that you're going to compromise your integrity. No, it means you got to be a good legislator. What's so funny is the movie Lincoln was shot in the Virginia House of Delegates chamber. A lot of people don't know that, by the way. So it's really funny because Tommy Lee Jones's character, I remember watching that because I had not seen that before I was in office. And I was watching that, and I texted my colleague, Delegate Dawn Adams, and I said, Dawn, he sits in your seat on the House floor. And she's like, yeah, I know. Isn't that so cool? But one of the things that you really take away from that movie that is based on real life is that people forget that when they really over the top glorify Abraham Lincoln as this larger than life person, he was a politician at the end of the day, right? He was a deal maker. He still had to figure out, how do you work with people who disagree with you? How do you bring them into the fold to get them to agree on something that's still really important? And that was one of the things I thought was so interesting with that portrayal, was basically the idea of like, hey, look, even these people who were absolutely, in the American zeitgeist for exemplary leadership and all the things that come with it. It's like, yeah, peel that onion back, and then you find out, oh, right, remember, he was elected. He had to run for office. He had to do all these things to try to appeal to the most number of people and stay true to himself while trying to do that, right? And you're like, oh, hey, some of that's relatable. And at the same time, you get there and you want to do something that is, fundamentally going to alter the course of world history in terms of the abolition of slavery. How do you get there with the votes to get the constitutional amendment in the first place, especially when you're dealing with a lot of people from the other party? There's a lot of deal making you got to do, right? There's a lot of compromise. There's a lot of ways that you got to talk about it. And this gets into the sausage making part of legislation, right? Where it's like, no one likes to see a sausage being made, and no one likes to see how legislation is made. But it doesn't always have to be, maybe the best way to put it is, when I got there, by default, the process was not as inherently terrible, awful as you might think it is most of the time. Sometimes, and this happened this year, and I'll even call it out, the bill that we all voted, all but one of us voted for, which was, we would call it the Dominion bill, which was basically to restore a lot of oversight, government oversight and such. Oh my God, the legislative process that produced this bill was a heaping pile of garbage that produced a decent bill. I hated the process for that. I, behind the scenes, fumed about the process for it. And when it came time to vote for it, I had to ask myself, what's the greater good? Is the greater good going to be to hit the no button out of a protest for a process that I think was completely, utterly anti-transparent? That was the definition of backroom deals. That was everything else that I thought was disgusting about politics. Or do I look at the text and the words that are on the paper after this process has come forward, and I am voting on the text that it comes before us? That's a decision I had to make, right? And sometimes this is going to be one of those where you can try to take the highest of moral high grounds and realize that if you get this vote wrong, that it's going to do more damage than good for people. Or you can vote the other way and realize that the process that produced this is antithetical to a lot of things that you stand for, quite frankly, but the product itself is what's on the board. When you go to hit that green light or red light, or you could hit that request to speak button. You got to remember that you're looking up and you are here to talk about something that is going to that the words in front of you are what will directly affect the people you represent. Whereas the process that produced those words is something that you can reform long-term within the legislative process, but it's not going to affect the day-to-day lives of people who you represent because it's done, it's over. You now have a product that's been produced for you. Here it is.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of leadership on this, there comes a point in this line of work where you go, I can be really frustrated at a lot of things, and I have to always remember what's the greatest good. Sometimes a bad process produces bad bills, and you should call out all of that stuff and then vote no. Absolutely. Sometimes a bad process produces a mediocre bill where you're like, I'm going to vote no on this today because this should be better. My constituents deserve better than this. Okay, if that's what happens. But here, let me tell you another one. Last year, we had a vote on the on repealing the grocery tax. Grocery tax is inherently regressive, no question. Inherently regressive tax, would be happy to repeal it. And yet, a portion of the grocery tax was dedicated to transportation. Specifically, 53% of it was dedicated towards maintenance for transportation. We're talking about $190 million over 2 years. At a time where we had, in 2022, we would have more than 1,000 people die on Virginia roadways. In 2021, we had 968 people die on Virginia roadways. And from the grocery tax, they're talking about making the localities whole. They're going to, supplant some of the funding that they were otherwise going to be losing from this. They were talking about making sure education was whole. Okay, but how about transportation? Oh, well, we have transportation surplus. We're going to use this transportation surplus to cover this. Bull. There is no such thing as a transportation surplus when we have $47 billion of outstanding demand just in 9 jurisdictions in Northern Virginia alone. You cannot possibly say this. And at a time where you all haven't fixed the very freaking roads that are killing my constituents right now after I've been yelling hard and screaming about this for years. And so what ended up happening is I stood on the House floor and I asked, did you all make transportation funding whole? No, because we have transportation surplus. If you have transportation surplus, how come Rollins Ford Road isn't fixed? How come Route 28 isn't fixed? Oh, well, then there is no transportation surplus. I railed on this, threw a royal epic fit on the House floor on that bill and on a bill that would have temporarily repealed the gas tax, which would have been a disaster for Virginia in terms of making sure that our roads are well maintained and keeping people safe. It would have been like the return, you're talking about like $11 return but that would otherwise cost people, probably get people killed, like more people killed than who are already getting killed. I threw a epic fit about these. And when it came to on that one vote on the grocery tax, knowing fully well that they were going to gut $190 million from transportation funding, and my constituents sent me to Richmond to get more transportation funding, that was antithetical to my values, even though the result would have been, hey, getting rid of the grocery tax sounds good. I am the only legislator from either party in either chamber who voted against it repeatedly because I will not defund transportation, period. I won't do it. Not to the tune of 9 digits. Absolutely not. It goes against my values. That was a hard vote to cast. I'm going to get hit in the face this year over the next 20 weeks because of that vote. I know that's coming. I am well aware that I am playing with fire on a bill that was going to pass no matter what I chose to do. It was so against my conscience. I could not, in good faith, and look at myself in a mirror and say, I did the best job for my constituents and I did the best job for the Commonwealth because I voted to defund transportation. Get out. Absolutely not. And so sometimes you have to take that hard vote, if for no other reason than to know that you did the right thing for the right reason.
Yeah.
And so I showed you between those two bills, one where you got to make a compromise in terms of like, this process is terrible, but the end result is okay, versus the process is terrible. And actually, in that case, the process wasn't the problem in that case. The argument for the process was the problem because they were arguing something that was fundamentally not true, which is a supposed transportation surplus. you can, if you underfund transportation and then magically you have more tax receipts coming in, you go, oh, there's a surplus. That's because you're not spending enough on transportation projects to begin with. So yeah, surprise with. So I hope these examples, of nothing else, show you that you've got to consider a lot of this stuff, issue
Yeah.
to issue. And at the same time, you do have to pick your battles. And I picked my battle. The battle that I picked on the Dominion bill was to throw a fit about it behind the scenes. And then when the time came, and I saw that it did more good than harm, I voted for it. And then on the grocery tax one, where it is against every ounce of my being to defund transportation, I'm willing to take the hit on it, because there's not a chance in hell that I think that, we should have less money for fixing our roads, bridges, pedestrian paths, bicycling lanes, everything else that we need. And so, I know I did the right thing for the right reason.
In addition to those examples of kind of legislative battles, you've, had a lot of success at getting bills, passed and signed, and you've cooperated across the aisle. As we conclude this episode on the dynamics of two-way influence, it's clear that effective leadership thrives on collaboration, open communication, and mutual respect. The insights shared today highlight the importance of building authentic relationships and understanding the perspectives of others. By embracing these principles, leaders can foster environments that not only encourage cooperation, but also drive meaningful change. Thank you for listening. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through the noise in today's fragmented and noisy world. Social Driver teamed up with the George Washington University College of Professional Studies and the Communications Board to recognize these chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Chief Influencer, a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board. If you know a leader who should be featured as a chief influencer, please nominate them at chiefinfluencer.org. For show notes and more, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn. Until next time.